the long-awaited and much requested what defects are allowable in a CGC 9.8 video. Stay tuned.
Comically correct comics.
Welcome back to Comically Correct Comics. I'm your host, Comic Guy Bry. Thank you for stopping by, and I want to start by taking this opportunity to say thank you. Thank you to all my viewers, subscribers, everyone for all the likes, the subs, the comments. I truly appreciate all of you, and I don't think I say that enough. But it's true that I wouldn't be here without you guys, and I'm having a ton of fun doing this. I have a lot of big ideas in store for the future, and one promise I can always make to you is that I will always strive to make better content, consistently compelling content. That's what this video is all about. Today's video is all about what defects CGC will allow in a book and still give it that coveted grade of a 9.8. Because as you can see, I kind of have a lot of slabs. I've done a lot of CGC submissions recently, and I've bought a lot of CGC slabs from other people. So I have a really good idea of consistent flaws that CGC will allow in a 9.8. Now, it's important to note that CGC has not published its grading criteria anywhere. So any information on the subject is purely anecdotal from collectors who have gathered hands-on experience through often many painful CGC submissions of their own. And that's what this video is all about. It's my experience through many of my painful submissions. And this video is going to include books that I submitted with a pre-screen, books that I submitted without a pre-screen, books that I submitted a month ago, books that I bought from other people, books that were submitted years ago. So the reason I mention this and the reason that it's important is because all of the books in this video are from a wide range of submissions. It wasn't just one submission where CGC was having an off day, which still wouldn't make a lot of sense because 3 people are involved in the grading process before something gets a grade. So unless all 3 of those people went to lunch together and got some bad sushi, which, you know, that actually could be possible, then maybe all 3 of them were having a bad day and that submission set got weird grades. But overall, the books in this video are from a wide range of submissions, so it's so that we know that data is consistent. These are consistent flaws that CGC allows, not just a one-off. And that being said, CGC is incredibly consistent, okay? They've graded to date over 7 million collectibles. Over 7 million collectibles. And I know that there are times when you might get a slab back that has a hair stuck in it or a big old fingerprint on the book or something. There are exceptions. I mean, if you do anything 7 million times, there's going to be weird exceptions. But by and large, they are incredibly consistent and they have the industry standard for grading. I think that can be agreed upon. And I'm not really here to argue about that point. I'm just want to put it out there that they are incredibly consistent. And with that said, we can consistently know what to expect. And so in order for a defect to make it onto my list of allowable defects in a CGC 9.8, I'm going to need to see 5 different examples of it from books across many different submissions. Okay, so I'm looking at books from my personal collection that are that I bought from other people. I'm looking at books like this that I've submitted myself. I'm looking at books that I did pre-screen, not pre-screen. I have a wide range of books that I'm using for this, and I have to see at least 5 examples in multiple different submissions in order to classify it as an allowable defect. So first, let's talk about the grading scale. For those of you that don't know, the grading scale for CGC Comics goes like this: 0.5, 1.0, 1.5, 1.8, 2.0, and then 0.5 increments all the way to 9.0, then 9.2, 9.4, 9.6, 9.8, 9.9, and 10.0. So 9.8 is not mint. It's technically near mint / mint. 9.9 is mint. 10 is gem mint, like our boy Gem Mint. So there are 2 grades above a CGC 9.8. So 9.8 is not mint. It's near mint / mint. So although CGC hasn't published their grading criteria for each grade publicly, they have published their grading scale, which shows a little bit of a description for what each grade means, but it's not the detail that you and I are after in this video about detailed explanations of what defects are allowed. So to start, it would be worthwhile to list the description of each grade, starting with a 10.0 is gem mint. It's the highest grade assigned. The collectible must have no evidence of any manufacturing or handling defects whatsoever. No evidence of handling or manufacturing defects at all. That's a 10.0. It's a ghost. They hardly ever exist, and usually only exist in square bound books, lenticular covers, different types of material used for a comic so that it's less likely to be defective in manufacturing. These days, the materials for books are so poor that just off the press, they have defects. A 9.9 is mint, and this is the collectible is nearly indistinguishable from a 10.0, but may have a very minor manufacturing defect. It will not have any evidence of handling defects, so only a very minor manufacturing defect. Now a 9.8 is near mint / mint, and it's a nearly perfect collectible with negligible handling or manufacturing defects. And a 9.6 is near mint plus, which is classified as a very well preserved collectible with several minor manufacturing or handling defects. So really what we're trying to nail down is what is a negligible handling or manufacturing defect, because a 9.8 is allowed to have negligible manufacturing or handling defects. So it can have several handling and or manufacturing defects. What's important is the severity of the defects and the sum total of the defects. So say it has 4 tiny manufacturing defects. The sum total of those 4 is passable for a 9.8, whereas it has one, it's kind of a bigger defect, but other than that, it's perfect, 9.8. So the severity of the defect plays a role, and the sum of the severity of the defects plays a role. Now, it's incredibly important to mention that at the end of the day, grading is still subjective. It's still ambiguous. It's still open to interpretation. It relies upon human judgment, the grader. And so we're never going to nail down a specific dictionary of what's allowed and what's not allowed. We just have these really definable areas that we can look at, but it's never going to be exact. It always comes back down to human interpretation. The first defect that we're going to talk about, and that I see in about 95% of my comics, is bindery tears at the top and bottom of the spine. I don't know what it is about this. Maybe it's the way they come off the press. I do know that the way that they're shipped probably plays a role, where they're bouncing against the edge of the box. But a small bindery tear at the top and bottom of the spine is allowable in a CGC 9.8. For the bindery tear to pass as being allowed, it needs to be less than 1/16 of an inch at the top and less than 1/16 of an inch at the bottom. I have seen exceptions to this. I've seen bindery tears at the top that were closer to 1/8 of an inch. But the standard, okay, that I think is consistent is less than 1/16 of an inch at the top or bottom. Now let's jump into this video where I look at several books that show bindery tears at the top and the bottom. All right, so this clip is going to show bindery tears and color rub down the side of the spine. And this is a little bit harder to catch in the camera, but there you can see it. We're just going to go all the way down the spine. You can see up at the top we have a bindery tear that is 1/16 of an inch or less, and then just that color rub white line down the spine that comes from shipping. And it's just but as you can see, overall it's a negligible defect. This is a 9.8, sharp corners. Everything else about it's a 9.8, so that's why it's allowable. Here we have another example of that in a 9.8. We have a bindery tear at the top that is 1/16 of an inch or less, and we have that color rub that goes down the length of the spine. And as you can tell, other than that, this book is nearly perfect, which is why it has a 9.8. And you can see the white line that goes down the spine and the bindery tear at the bottom. Here's another example of the bindery tear at the top, the white line that goes down the side, and the bindery tear at the bottom. The next defect that made it onto my list as allowable in a 9.8, which I think might spark a little bit of controversy, but that I have seen time and time again from different submissions across different years, across different eras of books, from pre-screened, not pre-screened, I've seen them all, is spine ticks. Now, in order for a spine tick to be allowed in a 9.8, in my opinion, it needs to be 1/16 of an inch or less, and typically doesn't break color, and you can't see it when you look at the book straight on. You have to catch the book in the light to see the spine tick. That's what I've noticed to be consistent with allowed spine ticks, is that you can't see them when you're just looking at the book. You have to catch it in the light, and it has to be less than 1/16 of an inch, and typically it doesn't break color. Oftentimes it will still break color just a little tiny bit and still get that 9.8. So if it doesn't break color and it's less than 1/16 of an inch and the book is otherwise perfect, I think it will pass and get a 9.8 every time. And so this is where that term negligible comes into play, because remember, a 9.8 has negligible evidence of manufacturing or handling defects. Negligible. So if I'm grading the book and I'm looking at it, it's got sharp corners, it lays flat, there's little to no waviness, there's no color rub. It's otherwise a perfect book, but if I catch it just right in the light, I see, oh yeah, it has a couple spine ticks here, but they don't break color, they're tiny, they're less than 1/16 of an inch. Then I would say that's negligible. This is otherwise a nearly perfect comic. And so that's where the term negligible is really important, is can you look at it still with those spine ticks and say, yes, it has spine ticks, but it's otherwise perfect, therefore they're negligible. That's the key. Now, if I was looking at that same book and I saw the spine tick when I was looking at it straight on, I didn't have to catch the light, I just looked at it and said, oh yeah, there's a little spine tick. That's a 9.6. It's no longer negligible because I can see it right away straight on. I don't have to hunt for it. And there's a difference. All right, so here we have examples of spine ticks that are allowed in a 9.8. And it's kind of hard to see on camera, but as you can see straight on, there are no spine ticks. But if you do churn it and catch it in just the right light, you can see just the right light, you can see the spine tick right there. Now it's less than 1/16 of an inch, and it's pretty much negligible. Now here's another example of a 9.8 that has a spine tick. This one is color breaking, and it's about 1/16 of an inch. It also has that bindery tear at the bottom, but as you can see from looking at it straight on, it's negligible. It's otherwise perfect. And so this is a nearly perfect 9.8. So this is an example of one that has multiple tiny ones, and they're about that size. They're hard to catch in the light, but they go all the way up, and there's many of them, probably 5 or 6, but they're all tiny, and so the sum of all of those are negligible. Okay, and here's another example of one that has some tiny spine ticks, the sum of which are negligible. And when you look at it straight on, you can't see them. You have to catch it in just the right light. All right, now here's one that is, here's some spine ticks on this one. That there's one right there. But as you can see, this one, it breaks color, but it's tiny. It's less than 1/16 of an inch. And there's another one there that does not break color. Another one there that does not break color. Another one there does not break color. And on the back, you can see that even that little piece of cover right there is kind of folded over a little bit because the cover goes over the other pages. That's okay, that's negligible. And there's the other one, and there's another one right there. So the sum total of all of those are negligible. When you look at this comic from a distance, you don't see any of them, and it's otherwise nearly perfect. The next defect that is allowable in a 9.8 is a slight waviness to the book. Okay, and it has to be slight, and it's very common in newer modern Marvel comics because they use that cheap paper. Up next is a little clip that shows the waviness that is allowed, and I think this is about the max waviness that will be allowed in a CGC 9.8. All right, so here we have, it's actually the same comic from a different clip, but this comic shows the slight waviness that is allowed, and still gets a 9.8. Do you see those slight ripples there? That's okay. It's negligible. It's a 9.8. And here is another example of the waviness that's allowed. Now this clip, this one here is probably the max amount of waviness that would be allowed in a 9.8. And it's otherwise perfect. I mean, if that was coupled with any kind of spine ticks, this one probably wouldn't have hit a 9.8. It's got really sharp corners. Everything else is almost perfect. And so that's important to remember, is that it's the sum total. So if it has this amount of waviness with a spine tick, it's probably a 9.6. The next defect that made it onto my list as allowable in a 9.8 is a miswrap. And this is one of the easiest ones to tell because we have so many examples of miswraps that get a 9.8. And it will get a 9.8 so long as the miswrap is 1/16 of an inch or less. That's to be safe. I have seen time and time again miswraps of 1/16 of an inch or less get the 9.8. Sometimes I've even seen even bigger miswraps get a 9.8. But for the sake of consistency and for this video, we're going to say that it's 1/16 or less, it'll get a 9.8 every time, so long as it's otherwise pretty much perfect. So here's a picture of Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. #1 with a miswrap. And the reason I picked this book, even though I don't have it personally, is because I have a 9.6 with the exact same miswrap. And here's another copy of Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. in a CGC 9.8 with a very similar miswrap. Here's a shot of ASM 129 with a miswrap that still got the 9.8. Miswraps are a little bit harder to find in modern books, although I do have several myself. Here's an X-Men 119 with a miswrap that got the 9.8, and here's an X-Men 132 that got a miswrap, that has a miswrap and still got the 9.8. All right, so here we have a couple examples of books that are actually in my possession with a miswrap. And as you can see right there, that is a miswrap that's about 1/16 of an inch, which is the smallest measurement on a regular tape measure. And on this comic here, you can see the miswrap over here on the edge is even less than 1/16 of an inch, so it definitely passes. From the front, you can't even really tell the miswrap except on this side. You can see it's a little bit short over there. And that is across the board for these books here. They all have that miswrap. So while miswraps should definitely be a consideration when you're buying a comic book, like if you're going for a Grail as the ASM 129, first appearance of Punisher, you should seriously consider whether or not you're willing to accept a miswrap. So it should be a consideration when you're buying a comic book, but it's absolutely allowable in 9.8. So if you're thinking about submitting a book and that's a consideration, it will still get the 9.8 so long as it's otherwise pretty much perfect. The next defect that I've always wondered about but now have firm confirmation about is spine rub due to shipping. A comic can have spine rub down the length of the spine due to shipping and still get a 9.8. And now that I've received comics directly from Diamond, I see exactly where it comes from. They put the raw books in a box. They put 2 stacks of 100 and a little piece of cardboard in the middle, and the spines just rub against the cardboard box, and they just rub and rub and rub all the way through shipping. By the time I get them, nearly 100% of comics have a white line down the length of the spine from rubbing against the box. And that's not just me. That's where, you know, everyone is getting their comics from, is Diamond Comics, except for exclusive covers and other things. But the main distribution channel for comic books is Diamond Comics. And almost all the modern Marvel titles have that white line of spine rub down the spine. Other comics, like indie publishers like Aftershock and Image and Boom Studios, they use, across the board, they use higher quality paper. And so it's less of a consideration, it's less of a problem getting that spine rub. But here's a clip of several books that have that white line from spine rub all the way down and still got a 9.8. And this one here is just another good example of the color rub, the spine rub that is allowed on an otherwise perfect 9.8. All right, the next defect that made my list to allowable in a CGC 9.8 is color rub. Now, the big question is how much color rub is allowed. And this continues to be questionable for me after doing this research, because color rub isn't, it's hard to quantify, because sometimes it's a thin line that goes the length of the comic. Other times it's a thick little patch in one area. Other times it's just around the staple. So it's hard to say how much surface area is allowed. It's possible with some calculations, but it's still ambiguous and open to interpretation. But color rub is allowed. I would just say, I'm going to use the term slight color rub, and it is allowed at both staples. And here I'm going to show you a clip with examples of color rub in many different... All right, so here we have some examples of 9.8s that have color rub. And on this one here, you can see color rub right there by the staple. Right there, and it's about the length of the staple. And on the back you can see there's some slight color rub by that staple. This one is really slight. Now this example here is a little bit more extreme. You can see the color rub goes that whole length right there. So that's pretty significant. That's more than the length of the staple. And it's also down here at the bottom. That is all color rub right there. So the sum total of these two spots, man, that's got to be at least an inch or two of color rub on that one. Now this one is a reprint. It's not the real thing. God, if that was the real thing. But this one has a couple things going on. One, it has the miswrap. And 2, it has this color rub right there, which is obvious, and that is significant. So it's still allowed in 9.8, and I've seen many different examples. These are all books that came from different places too. Right, so here's my list of allowable defects in a CGC 9.8. Spine ticks that are 1/16 of an inch or less, and that you can't see when you look at the comic straight on. You have to turn and catch the comic in the light. That's allowed. Bindery tears at the top and bottom of the comic that are 1/16 of an inch or less. Spine rub that can go up to the entire length of the spine, that's due to shipping and doesn't split the spine open. Slight waviness to the book. This is really kind of open to interpretation, but just think slight. It can have the slightest waviness to the book. Miswraps that are 1/16 of an inch or less. So at the end of the day, grading is still subjective. It's open to interpretation. It's the eye of the beholder, and it's up to the graders. And the key term in determining whether a defect is going to get a 9.8 or not is it negligible? Okay, if you can look at the comic and say, yeah, it has a little spine tick here, or it has a little bindery tear here, or it has a slight waviness, but other than that, it's a nearly perfect collectible, everything else is perfect, then it's negligible and it will get the 9.8. However, if it has all of the negligible defects that I've mentioned in this video, all 5 of them at the same time, then it's not going to get a 9.8. It has to be overall negligible defects, and usually only 1 or 2, sometimes 3 if it is super minor for each one. So my hope is that this video was helpful to you and that it will be helpful in making decisions for books that you're going to submit. If you found anything in this video useful, please leave a like and consider hitting subscribe. Thank you so much for sticking with me all the way to this part of the video. I truly appreciate you, and we will see you in the next video. Bye.